So Maya, welcome to the podcast. You are the founder of another podcast called That's My Name. So before we even get started into that, that sounds so interesting. And why is that, important as a title for a company or podcast? But we met in London earlier this year, or the summer this year, during the heat wave, at LinkedIn, at a LinkedIn sponsored event called People Like Us. And I saw you do this amazing presentation about name bias and how prevalent it is, and even in the UK and abroad. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about. But before we get into that, just tell myself and the audience a little bit about yourself.
Definitely, CJ, and thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I know it's been a long time coming, but yeah, I'm really, really excited to be here with you. A bit about me. I am born and raised in London. I'm still here today. I feel like I should get out and see the world a bit, but yeah, still in
Come to
London.
the US. Come to the US.
Yeah, I could try. I've actually never been to the US, so I'd like to, get out and kind of see what all the hype's about. Yeah. So I'm half Japanese, half English, and I think we'll kind of come on to that in a bit, because it's my name kind of plays a role in and gives a bit away around kind of my heritage and my background. Currently working in the field of behavioral finance at a bank. But then off the side of my desk, outside of work, obviously I have the podcast, That's My Name, which I set up in June 2021. Also recently, or earlier this year, qualified to be a coach. So life coaching, career coaching, and so on. Thank you. All different kind of pieces to me. Very, very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And really, That's My Name has a real strong key underlying of identity, inclusion, and belonging. So yeah.
Awesome. Love it. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about, That's My Name. So why did you come up with that title for your podcast? Why is that important? Well, I don't want to ask too many questions, but yeah, how'd you come up with that name?
Yeah. So how did I come up with that name? So I was brainstorming a few. I knew it had to be something about name. It had to have the word name in it, because the podcast's all about names. What's My Name? That's like a Rihanna song. So I was like, I don't really want to name it after a Rihanna song. Say My Name, again, that's like a Destiny's Child song. Mm-hmm. There's so many songs about names. I only really realized it until I started the podcast and kept hearing like, say my name, this is my name, and in songs. But yeah, I kind of it was quite easy to kind of come to the That's My Name as the title / name of the podcast, because I wanted it to be different from like songs, thinking from like a searchability perspective. Like I didn't want people to type in like, what's my name? And then Rihanna comes up. I wanted like the podcast to kind of come up. Yeah.
Well, it might be reversed. So people type in what's my name, and then you come up, and instead of them Rihanna, and then you come up. So
true, that would be good.
So when it comes to name bias, I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, and we talk a lot about name biases and how it prevents you from getting a job at times, prevents you from opportunities that you may or may not even know about. And so I also am aware that I have a very, like an English name too, right? So I'm Christopher. My middle name is Jabbar, which is a Muslim Arabic name.
Interesting.
I don't use often, but I like it. It's very powerful. And last name is Gross, which is German. And so when you hear Christopher J. Gross, it sounds in the States and abroad, it sounds like, oh, hey, this guy, we don't know what his background is. So I have not experienced that as a blind spot for myself. And as the more I learned about, the name bias, like my sister's name is Selena Lolita Gross. She's not Spanish. She does not speak Spanish, but you can imagine maybe some challenges that she's experienced and not even been aware of it. And so what has been your experience with the name biases?
Yeah, definitely. It's such an interesting question. And throughout the conversations that I've had for my podcast and kind of beyond the podcast about names, is that names can really play such a big role in how people view you and the assumptions that perhaps people make about you before they've even met you. So I can provide a few examples. One extreme example is I had a guest on my podcast called Princess. That's her first name. And whenever I speak about this, I'm like, well, and for your audience to kind of reflect, what do you think of when you hear the name princess? Like, what kind of imagery or person kind of comes to mind? So princess was applying to jobs and with the name princess, and she wasn't getting many job interviews and she wasn't really getting anywhere in her job search. And then one day she was having a conversation with her brother, and her brother was like, why don't you just use a different name? So she then she shortened her first name to Prin, and her surname is Adugyamfi. She just changed it to Adu, so Prin Adu on her CV. So really simplified version of her name. And all of a sudden she started to get job interviews and get offered jobs, just because of this kind of change on her CV. And I've heard it in different, not just at work, but also on dating profiles. So I was speaking to someone and he
So wait a minute, in dating profiles.
Yes. Yeah.
So I can't wait to hear about this part.
Yeah. So he actually came up to me after the People Like Us talk where we met. And he was like, can I share with you like my experiences on dating profiles? And I was like, hold up, I've never even considered this before, that this has an impact. But yeah, he was going by his kind of birth name, which was Mithun. He's of Asian background and he wasn't really getting many matches. And then he was like, like, should I change my name? So he changed his name to Mitchell. But he started getting matches. And I was just like a bit speechless that it's not just happening in work, but it's also happening with like dating and romantic relationships and maybe even friendships and stuff like that. It's just so widespread. But obviously and the princess one is quite like an extreme example or an extreme, like very explicit.
Let's go back. So what was the connotation with princess? Yeah. What did they believe when they heard princess? I know I may have my own mindset, and it's important for the viewers to know that you're in the UK, I'm in the US, so we're coming from two different cultural perspectives as well. So what did that mean in the UK when someone heard princess?
Yeah, so in the UK, when you hear the word princess, obviously I can't speak for the whole of the UK, but typically if you hear the name princess, you think, okay, this person might be from like a poor or lower socioeconomic background. I think you can't really necessarily identify the ethnicity of someone with the name princess. For me personally, I don't think I'd be able to. But I think there's something around, okay, maybe this person's not very serious, and maybe this person could, and even words kind of associated with princess, you could think of this person as being spoiled, as being, yeah, what I said, not very serious. You can't really take them seriously if they've got this name princess. That is kind of the thoughts that I think would come up for someone like looking at a CV.
I think it's the same thing in the United States. It's interesting that you said that, because I interviewed someone the other day and their name was Princess. And it's really hard to mitigate that bias, because that's the same thing I was thinking. Prince. Yeah. So I was like, all these thoughts came up. I was like, pull it back. Yeah. And so that's really interesting how that name, and there's a story right behind the name that then people kind of, it drives your assumptions, it drives how you connect with people. And so what has been some of the challenges that people, some other, you mentioned interviewing, you mentioned dating, which is huge. Those are two big pieces. Like, you can't find a spouse because they don't like your name, you got to change your name to Mitch or Mitchell. And then being princess, so that can really, put a damper on the way you approach your social life, right? So what are some other experiences people have having? And then at the end, like, what do you do about it?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot around people changing their name to fit in and assimilate. So that's all the way from like students from perhaps China coming over to the UK or going to the US and picking like an English name to apply to university for. And then when they go to this university in the States or in the UK or even like Canada, they're using this kind of English name to kind of make it easier for everyone around them to kind of deal with and interact with them. But if that's not the name that they were born with or that they're used to hearing, and they're only using it to assimilate and fit in, I think that can be a bit damaging to like your sense of identity and belonging and so on, because I do genuinely believe that names are such a big part of your identity that if you're having to change it, or you feel like you have to change it just to fit in with the environment, I think there's issues there around like how much that person would actually feel like they belong or are included in those kind of environments. So there's, yeah, in education, with education. So I had a guest from Korea, and actually at the age of 5 in her English class in South Korea, her English teacher was like, come and pick a name out of a hat. So her name was Yerin. She picked the name Claire out of a hat.
So she then became Claire.
Yeah.
Through the lottery.
Yes.
Wow. And so there's several things that I want to point out to people who may have a name like mine, right? Like Christopher, or, more, well, I wouldn't say common, but, more acceptable in certain cultures. One is that when you come from a culture, certain cultures, that name is correlated with who you are to be in this world. And sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it has to do with family. And so by you pulling away from that can cause trauma to your identity and who you are. And at the same time, if we can be fair and honest, like, so how do you get the opportunities and get the jobs? If you don't change your name, you can't get through the door. And so has your guests and people you have had conversations with, have they come up with healthy strategies? So obviously the work that we do in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're getting companies to change their thinking, start mitigating biases. But I always am an advocate for also, as an individual contributor or a person looking for employment, I don't want to wait for the company to change. So I'm going to do things to put myself in position while the company is changing to meet them where they are. But that also is dangerous because then you might have, well, I've been called Ben for so long, and come to find out 20 years later, I was actually doing a training at Toyota, and this guy says, my name's not actually Ben, it's actually this. And it was a Japanese name. And the guy, it was just interesting. The guys who were working with him were upset that he didn't feel comfortable enough to share his name. So they didn't have empathy. The empathy was for themselves. It's like, it becomes a mess really when you start to pull these pieces apart. But I think that's the importance of having belonging and having these conversations, the conversation that you and I are having right now. So have you heard any interesting strategies that individuals or companies have been using to mitigate this bias?
Yeah, so I think from an individual perspective, I'm hearing more and more that people are actually reclaiming their birth names or their given names, or the names kind of that are more closely tied with their background and heritage. I'm really hearing that more, and I'm hearing people be more vocal about it. So I definitely have seen a bit of a shift around that, which I think is really, really great. It's people saying, this is my name, this is how you say it, this is why it's so important to me, and kind of celebrating their name. So I think that's a really, really key kind of one, kind of using it as a maybe topic of conversation or a conversation starter to also allow, colleagues, friends, and so on to get to know you a bit better. So I think that's a really, really great one to kind of celebrate it and shine a light on the name. Another one is, if people are getting your name wrong, and I've spoken to so many people whose names are mispronounced. My name is often mispronounced. And it does feel awkward kind of correcting someone and being like, actually, my name's pronounced like this. It can feel a bit awkward, but again, it's so important to correct it, because how would someone know if people aren't mind readers? There's so many billions of different names out there in the world with billions of different pronunciations, and also different pronunciations for the same name. So if the person is doing it completely unintentionally and not in like an aggressive way, they're just kind of getting the name wrong, correct it. Because I mean, I'm guilty of this. I found myself previously getting really frustrated at people who kept calling me the wrong name, but I've really had to take a step back and think, but did I correct them? They're not a mind reader. I think that's a really, really important part, because yes, it can be annoying for your name to be kind of mispronounced or misspelled, but you also need to take the responsibility to kind of correct that and support other people through that kind of journey. So that's like an individual perspective. And then from a work perspective, I'm seeing things like being able to record how you pronounce your name. So I'm seeing that on different like company intranet pages.
Very
LinkedIn has rolled out that feature, which is fantastic. And I encourage everyone to kind of use that. So yeah, I'm seeing workplaces kind of focus more on that as well, which I think is really, really important.
So you said several things that I want to try to remember if I can hit a couple of points. One of the things you said is, so it kind of the onus is on the individual as well as the other person who has the name to make sure it's pronounced correctly. But this is where belonging comes into play, because when you feel like you belong, you feel comfortable to correct people and to say, hey, Mike, actually pronounce my name. So people mispronounce my name, Jabbar, as Jabber. And it really irritated me. And so another, it's just, I was just like, I don't even use it. So people wouldn't even know my middle name. And I'm sure if I had the first name, it'd be more challenging, because now it's something that I'm constantly having to help people to pronounce. I think that nuance, and it could be two things. It can be challenging for both people, but it also can give an opportunity where people get to know one another. And you don't grow when things are just going well. You grow when there's some type of strife. And so if we have to go, I can't tell you how many times I've had to pronounce people's name and try. And then they just say, you know what, they give up. It's not me giving up. They give up because it's a lot of effort and energy. It makes me feel uncomfortable because now you're putting focus on me. And I think what I told them was that I want everyone to be comfortable, and your name is important to me. So whether I'll just go and practice on my own. Me saying that as a leader in a company organization sets the standard for someone else saying, well, maybe I can come out and share my true name, and maybe I can work harder in calling and sharing people's names. So what I found in the work that I do is that people have said, I'm actually going to just, they don't actually change their name. They change their name because people keep mispronouncing it. So they allow that to be their name, and it goes on for years and years and years. And every time I do that workshop on name bias, someone either comes in front of the group and says, my actual name is this. And it's either, it's like a Nigerian name, or it's an Indian name, or, whatever culture it comes from. And people go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. And so creating that safe space for people to come and really kind of come out and say, this is actually my name. And I appreciate, people calling me by this name. I think it's powerful and necessary for leaders to lean into and create space for people to kind of have that comfort and ability to connect to one another in that way. So it's cool. Okay. Now, so you have the podcast, you have people on and they talk about their stories. So before, we kind of close out, do you have any inspirational, stories about people who have done something around their name and really kind of, shine the light on this conversation, changed people's ways of thinking and beliefs? And what could someone who's listening to this, either they have a common name and now it's a blind spot and they're like, I didn't know that was a problem. Or if they're listening to this and they say, hey, I'm a person who wants to, support people in pronouncing my name appropriately. What are some strategies for that? And then we'll get to, where can people find you?
Definitely. So there's a few things that come to mind. So the first one is going back to that story with Yerin Yoon from South Korea, who picked the name Claire. She went by the name Claire for like a few years. And then she was like, actually, I want to go by my birth name. So I love that, and obviously it's everyone's choice. It's someone's individual choice of whatever name they want to go to. But I thought it was just so lovely to hear that she decided to kind of reclaim her birth name. I thought that was really, really special, and has been quite kind of vocal about going by her like actual kind of birth name. So I thought that was really special. When you were first asking that question, two guests came to mind. So my first ever guest, Joanne Monk, and one of my most recent guests. So they're both members of the trans community, and they have shared their stories about how they have chosen their names. Obviously, well, not obviously, but typically you would choose a new name after or during your kind of transition. So just hearing those stories about choosing their names and just the bravery for me that really comes around, transitioning, and the trans community while they have support from a lot of people, they're also getting a lot of hate at the moment. So I think for those guests in particular who have come forward and really shared their stories so openly, I'm just so inspired by them and in awe of them around, them sharing their stories. And again, it's like the name piece. It's not necessarily something that you might think about too much when someone's kind of transitioning, but obviously it's such a key piece when we think about its ties to like identity and who we are and how we show up in the world. So those are kind of two key guests that come to mind for me.
Awesome. I love it. Well, listen, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I'll keep, watching you and celebrating what you're doing and what you're up to. But how can people find you? How can they locate the podcast?
Yeah, definitely. So people can find me on LinkedIn. So it's Maya Welford. Then podcast, it's on Instagram. It's at that's my name _pod. There's also a LinkedIn page, which is just that's my name. And I'm across all major platforms. So just type in that's my name and people can find me.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. So I look forward to maybe working with you again on another project, and definitely maybe when I come back to the UK in 2023, we'll connect again. So thank you.
Thank you so much, CJ.
I am CJ Gross, founder, CEO of Ascension Worldwide. Thank you for watching.